Archaic Records.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Archaic Records here with you again. My name is Jamie, coming to you from Nashville, Tennessee. Here to wish you a very happy Morrissey Monday, a celebration of all things Morrissey and the Smiths. And yes, I realize that today is factually Tuesday, but at least here in the United States, yesterday was a federal holiday, so today is sort of like a Monday, is it not? For today's episode, we're going to be taking a quick look at the brand new album by former Morrissey guitarist and self-proclaimed musical director, Boz Boorer. And is it accurate to describe Boz Boorer as former Morrissey guitarist, or is it that he's just not currently a Morrissey guitarist? Because the word former implies a sort of permanence to that situation that I have a hard time believing. Morrissey and Boz Boorer always have this tendency to sort of need one another when it comes to their professional lives. So here's at least hoping that Boz Boorer finds himself back in the Morrissey band at some point in time. And I gotta tell you, I really love doing these episodes where there is something current to talk about. Not that I don't love going back and talking about the old albums and tours from the past, because I certainly do. But I'm always a little bit grateful when we have something contemporary on the table. And this year has been pretty plentiful as far as news coming out of the Morrissey camp when it comes to Morrissey shows that he played out in Las Vegas not too long ago, along with the announcement of the big tour coming up this fall, as well as the reissue of Beethoven Was Deaf, not to mention Johnny Marr's upcoming fall tour with James here in the United States, and then the announcement of the reissue of his first solo album, Boomslang. So we have had plenty of news to chew over, if you will, coming out of the Morrissey camp over the past year. And I wish today's episode was sort of under happier circumstances, because I do love Boz Boorer. I think that most members of the Morrissey fan community feel the same way. He is a vital piece to my second favorite band of all time, that being the classic lineup of the Morrissey solo band. But I gotta tell you, this album, Morrissey Reimagined, is a pretty tough listen as far as I'm concerned. And I sort of had a feeling that it was going to be, because over the past couple weeks before this album was released, Boz Boorer was sort of releasing little snippets, teasers, if you will, out via his social media outlets. And man, I gotta tell you, despite the fact that he was pimping this album as if it was Abbey Road, none of these little snippets did anything to sort of attract my attention at all. But it wasn't until this past week, when this album was released, that I was able to sort of, ingest the grand scale of its mediocrity. I mean, this album is a drudge, in my opinion, and in the spirit of positivity, which is something that this channel is based on, if I were to try to think of the best thing that I could say about the album Morrissey Reimagined, it is that it's basically a bag of shit. I mean, I am convinced now that within the past 250 years, the three greatest crimes perpetrated against humanity were the Holocaust, slavery, and Morrissey Reimagined. Now, people are idiots, right? I accept that. That's why I try to keep most of them at arm's distance. But if you really genuinely like this album, I mean, you are a dullard. And I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear your opinions about it, because you're never going to change my mind. But I see comments on the social media outlets that Boz Boorer has, and people are like, this is an instant classic, Bob. And I think to myself, I can't even imagine putting myself into that mindset to think that this album is a classic, let alone barely even listenable. Now, if you're saying that, to, like I said earlier, promote, positivity and politeness. Man, I get that. I am all in favor of positivity, especially when it comes to, social media. But if your kid brings home an F on his report card, you don't shame him. You don't embarrass him. You sit down with him. You say, hey, did you do your best? Did you apply yourself? Did you really give this your best shot? Hey, man, I know. I hated math, too. I suck at math. We'll sit down. We're going to get this sorted out together. You and I, we're going to sit down. We're going to, knock this thing out. But you don't lie to him. You don't say, nailed it. And if you are praising this album, I get the sense that, this is exactly what you're doing. You are sort of heaping false praise on an album that just doesn't deserve it. This album is a tough listen. I did not expect this album to be very good based on the snippets of stuff that was being released through the social media outlets, but there's no way that I actually expected this album to be as bad as it is. And there are a couple tracks on this record that I think are fairly listenable. We'll kind of get to them when we get there. But for the most part, I mean, this album is just rough. Like I said, this album is called Morrissey Reimagined. Perhaps a better title of it would be, Clinging to Straws, Grasping at the Past. Help me, I've spent all my money. I don't think that this album is going to make you very much money, Boz Boorer. And that's the ultimate joke, right? Because in order to listen to this album, which I wanted to, I had to buy it. And it's not even the money. I don't even care about the money. I have plenty of money. But the thing that I'll never get back is the time that I have spent listening to this album 3 or 4 times over the past few days. That is the ultimate tragedy when it comes to this record. And I get the sense that if Boz Boorer's departure from Morrissey's band wasn't permanent before, then it might be now. Anyway, this record was released this past week, August 26th, 2024. It has 14 tracks. I think 2 of the tracks of the 14, maybe 2.5 of the 14 tracks on this record are semi-listenable. The rest of it is just forgettable, at least in my opinion. The first song on this album is the song Last of the Famous International Playboys, which is a personal favorite of mine. It is featured on my favorite album of all time, Bone a Drag. This song features vocals by Tony Stone. I'm not exactly sure who that is. I can tell you, at least on this particular tune, that the vocals sound as if the person is heavily constipated and they are just in the bowl struggling, wrestling a bear. It's got kind of a whimsical version of kind of London Calling as the instrumental track. It sounds sort of cheap and chintzy, artificially produced. That's one of the complaints I have about this record, is a lot of it is just so overproduced in the studio that it sounds like tinsel. It doesn't sound like a real album. It doesn't have any sort of organic feel to it. This is a real sort of bland, safe take on the song Last of the Famous International Playboys. Like I said, I'm not exactly sure who Tony Stone is, but unimpressed by that track at least. The second song on this album is London, which features vocals by Spider Stacy from one of my favorite bands of all time, the Pogues. I'm very impressed that Boz Boorer was able to get Spider Stacy to perform vocals on this record, and the vocals on this song are the jugs. I mean, Spider Stacy, has a more than passing resemblance vocally to his former band member, the great Shane MacGowan. Like I said, the Pogues are one of my, top 10 favorite bands probably of all time. Instrumentally, this song sounds kind of like 1994. It's got kind of an industrial element. It sounds a little bit like a cross between like the Doom generation and the Crow soundtrack, but it's also got this sort of tacky, generic, like club beat that kind of sits underneath the industrial elements to it. I was never a big industrial fan, even back in 1994. Now, as much as I loved a lot of those movies that featured that type of music in the soundtracks, Doom Generation in particular, if you have not seen the movie Doom Generation, I think it was from 1994, 1995. It's a movie that features Rose McGowan. That movie is the jugs. And this song kind of reminds me of that movie in a good way. So I would say that this song is one of the half-listenable songs because I do really like Spider Stacy's vocal track on this record. And there are certain elements to the instrumental track that I like, but I don't like that sort of generic boom-ch, boom-ch, boom-ch backbeat that sits kind of underneath the industrial one. So this song isn't terrible. I guess it's one of the more passable songs on the record. The third song on this album is Trouble Loves Me, performed vocally by Nina Diaz. And I gotta tell you, man, I really love her voice. Whoever Nina Diaz is, again, I'm not particularly sure who some of these people are, but this song is actually really good. This is one of the 2 tracks on this album that I really like. This is one of the couple that I would actually go back and listen to and sort of put on a playlist. A lot of this album I'm not going back and listen to, at least for a while, because I need a break from this thing. But this is a song that I actually really like. It's got kind of a shoegazy, trip-hop kind of feel to it. It reminds me of a combination of Jesus and Mary Chain mixed with Portishead and kind of solo Ian Brown. I like this. I love her voice. I love her vocal delivery. It's sort of true-ish to the Morrissey version of the song, but it's got kind of an interesting, cool take on it. So that song I actually really like a lot, Trouble Loves Me. After that, it goes into the song Ouija Board, which was performed vocally by Melanie Safka, of course, somebody that Morrissey just absolutely idolized. Sadly, she passed away this past January at the age of 76. Morrissey, of course, covered her song Some Say I Got Devil on his 2019 album California Sun. And this is another one of those songs on the record that I love. 2 in a row. Now, we got through the first 2 songs on this album, especially the first song. As I was listening to this record, we got through Last of the Famous International Playboys. I thought, okay, this is not good. But then, with Spider Stacy, London, I thought, okay, we're picking up a little bit of steam here. And then you got 2 songs in a row with Trouble Loves Me and Ouija Board, which are actually good because this is another one of the good songs on this record. I love her voice. I always have. The instrumental track on this is cool. It's got like a dreamy, spacey, sort of electronic, psychedelic backbeat, and mixed with her, aging, sort of gruff vocals. It is a beautiful rendition of this song. And you understand if you go back and listen to her records, especially even listening to this, which this may have been one of the last things she ever recorded. I mean, you totally understand why Morrissey has just such a huge love affair with her. This song is awesome. This is another song that I will go back and listen to. After that, though, we go into Maladjusted, which is vocally performed by somebody by the name of Lusty, who I don't exactly know who this person is, but their voice, to me, sounds almost exactly like Don Letts. Now, this is sort of a spoken word track. That's why the voice kind of reminds me of Don Letts. I've seen Don Letts interviewed a million times. Somebody that, like most of us, somebody I have all the admiration for in the world. But as I was listening to this track, Maladjusted, which is the pits, that's what I couldn't help but think was this is like Don Letts talking. Again, it's got kind of a 1994 Doom Generation Crow soundtrack vibe, kind of Ministry light. Again, I was never really the hugest fan of industrial music, even back in that industrial age during the late 1990s. I had a girlfriend at the time who was just obsessed with that kind of music. And it kind of wore me out, to be honest with you, because we went to go see all of those bands live over the years that her and I were together. We saw Ministry, we saw Pigface, we saw Pig, we saw KMFDM, we saw Ministry. I don't know if I mentioned that, but we saw all of these bands. And to me, it just all sounded exactly the same. Even when David Bowie, who's my second favorite recording artist of all time, even when he started doing the Trent Reznor, inspired material, it was not something that really grabbed me. Now, I love Bowie's album Outside. It sort of grew on me. I didn't love it at first. Now I really love it. But Earthling, I've never really even liked that record, honestly. But this song stinks. It's boring. It sounds very generic. It's like all of these sort of generic industrial tropes kind of thrown together. And I don't get the vocals at all. So, thumbs down to Maladjusted, a Morrissey song that I love, an album that I like a lot. The next song after that is a take on Jack the Ripper called Jack the Reggae. Get it? Performed vocally by Angel Naya. This track reminds me of an album that came out back in the very late 90s, early 2000s by Suggs, who is, of course, the front man from the band Madness. But in the late 90s, early 2000s, he put out an album called The Three Pyramids Club, which is an album now that most people probably don't remember. But it's an album that I actually loved at the time, and I still like. Actually, I still listen to Three Pyramids Club pretty often when it comes to going back and listening to Madness material. But this song just kind of stinks. It's really annoying. There's way too much chaos going on. There's way too much noise in the background. Now, I love Jamaican music. I am a Jamaican music loving son of a gun, if you know what I mean. But this is just a bad take on Jamaican music. And one of the things about this record that I don't like instrumentally is a lot of it is just so generic and vanilla. It sounds like a guy in his 60s who's trying very hard to come up with something creative and unique, and a lot of it ends up sounding boring or too busy, and that is the argument I make with this song. The thing I love about Jamaican music is I love its simplicity, and this is just chaos to a sort of bad, generic club, studio-produced Jamaican beat. This song stinks, and I don't really like the vocal performance. You can't really even hear what's going on in the song because there's just so much chaos. Jack the Ripper is sacred territory as far as I'm concerned when it comes to the Morrissey catalog. So this is probably a song that I won't go back and listen to much moving forward. After that, they go into Pregnant for the Last Time. This song was produced or performed vocally by Tim Polecat from Boz Boorer's band. The Polecats, a band that honestly I don't like. I've never liked the Polecats. I'm not really a big, huge fan of contemporary rockabilly. Now, I go back and listen to music from the 50s. You're onto something. But going back and listening to contemporary rockabilly, even a band like the Stray Cats that I want to like more than I do, but the Polecats are just a band I've never liked. I don't like his voice, and to me, that sort of explains, I guess, some of the rationale for Boz Boorer even trying to produce this album, because at least in my opinion, the Polecats are not a very good band, and I feel as if most people have probably lost interest in the Polecats. Maybe I'm wrong, but they were a band that I never understood, and nobody cares about Boz Boorer's solo material. Go look up Boz Boorer on Spotify. The guy's got like 400 listeners. So I understand why you're putting out this record. I totally get that you're trying to recreate some, or trying to build up some, some credibility or, anything. I don't understand, but man, this song is not very good either. Tim Polecat's voice is something that I've also never really liked. It's got a very bland sort of boring instrumental track. It sounds kind of like it's trying to be sort of pseudo indie rock meets contemporary rockabilly. Like I said, contemporary rockabilly is just something that I just am not really into. Bands like Big Sandy and the Fly-Right Boys and the Polecats and Stray Cats, I don't know. It's just something that I'm not very interested in. The vocals sound kind of empty To me, this song is just not very good. After that, they go into the song Kit, which was, of course, an unreleased track from 1997, performed vocally by Jimmy Necco. This song does nothing. And honestly, it's really not even worth having an opinion about, because this song is basically just an empty track. The instrumental track is boring. The vocal performance is basically non-existent. And again, like I said before, this sounds like Boz Boorer trying to come up with something that is interesting and relevant, and just ends up feeling empty and boring and ingenuine and way overproduced, which is another thing about this record. All of the instrumental tracks on this record, to me, are just way overproduced. They sound like something that was just performed in the studio. It doesn't sound authentic. It doesn't sound as if a lot of this stuff was even played by real music. It all sounds like programming. The song Kit is totally forgettable. After that is It Really So Strange? Performed vocally by Victor Hugnot, who has a really great voice, actually. I really like the vocal performance on this track, but apart from that, I just truly hate this song. Apart from the fact that he has a good voice, because this has that same sort of generic, overproduced backbeat, but this one has like a pinch of bluegrass, which just sounds completely manufactured. If you're going to do something like playing bluegrass, and maybe all of this stuff was played in the studio, I don't know, I wasn't there, but it sounds all programmed, like programmed banjo. And what is the deal with the rooster crowing in the background? Is this hee-haw? Are you kidding me with this song? Man, if I ever feel bad about my feelings towards this album, all I have to do is go back and listen to the song Is It Really So Strange? It is hokey. And maybe this is because I live here in Nashville, but if there's one thing I can just do without, it is these dumb country tropes. And man, this song just is irritating. This is probably the worst track on the album. No disrespect to the singer Victor Hugnot, who does as good a job as he can with this abortion, because this thing is rough. After that, they go into You're Gonna Need Someone on Your Side, vocally performed by Jay Judge and Boz Boorer. To me, this song is sort of a cross between Orgy, Alien Ant Farm, and Marilyn Manson. And again, it's got that kind of like tropey 90s industrial generic kind of vibe. This is the type of music I would expect to hear playing in over the loudspeaker when I walk into like a Spirit Halloween store. Just real generic, nondescript, spooky, gothy industrial music. The vocal performance on this song is okay. That's pretty much the best thing you can say about it. The next song after that is The More You Ignore Me, performed by Mario Cobo. This version is in Spanish. It's pretty good, actually. It's semi-true to the original version, and actually I kind of like it. It's probably one of the better tracks on the album. It's not anything that I'm probably going to go back and listen to on heavy rotation, but Mario Cobo has a good voice, and it's as good as anything else on the record. At least it sounds a little bit authentic. After that, they go into a song, a certain specific song, that I happen to think is the greatest song of all time, which is Every Day's Like Sunday. Now, I realize that Every Day is Like Sunday is not exactly the deepest cut in Morrissey's catalog, but it's just always been my favorite song. I don't know what to tell you. Every time I go see Morrissey live, this is a song that I want to see. I never get tired of it, never have, probably never will. And as I was listening to this album for the first time, despite the fact that it is a drudge, and it's not good. I felt relatively benign about it for the most part. Apart from the, is it really so strange, country jamboree. But then, you tread on sacred territory, son. This song was performed by Iris Griffiths. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that name right, but I'm not particularly interested in this individual anyway. This has a sort of cheap, tacky, kind of two-tone ska sound, which I love. I love all of the two-tone music from Britain in that era. It's one of my favorite eras of music. I love anything that is Jamaican or Jamaican influenced. The song sounds as if it's trying in vain to sound a little bit like Judge Dredd, dare I say, Bad Manners. Two artists that are among some of my favorites of that genre. But this song is not good. This song is sort of like watching somebody deliberately run over a kitten. It just makes you sad. It gives you an upset stomach. It makes you want to act out in a fit of rage. Oh my God. Are you serious? You can't be serious! Are you shitting me? Are you shitting me? I don't want to hear your dumb opinions if you like this album. I don't care. You're never going to change my mind. This is an album that should have never happened. Minus maybe 2.5 songs. This is an instant classic, Bob. Oh my God. I need to take a break. All right. Calm down. Life is, well, it's a little less livable knowing that this album exists, but it's still okay. All right, after that, have you heard the version of Every Day is Like Sunday? You're never going to change my mind. If you like this album, I don't know what to tell you. You need therapy. Okay. All right, I'm okay. After that was Satan Rejected My Soul, off of Maladjusted, a song that I love, performed vocally by Victor Torpedo, appropriately named artist considering he sunk this song. Nailed it. This is sort of a cross between mariachi and club music, and I can imagine Boz Boorer sitting in the studio thinking to himself, well, this has never been done. And listening to this track, you realize why it's never been done. Now, if you feel the urge to have chips and salsa along with your ecstasy, then this is probably your cut. But this song stinks. No offense to Victor Torpedo. All right. The last song on the album is I Can Have Both. Performed by Bridget Hanley, who does a great job on the vocals. I gotta tell you, I really like this song a lot. Because it's the last track on the album. Get it? You made it. There were times listening to this record, I didn't know if I was going to get all the way through it. There were a couple times I thought about driving my car to the edge of a forest, wandering deep in where my body could never be found, and just committing, feeding the animals, giving my body back to the planet. Great vocal performance on this song by Bridget Hanley, by the way. But very boring, vapid instrumental track. Totally uninspired. Boring. Just completely nothing. But it does end the album, which is a positive as far as I'm concerned. If you're interested in going back and listening to this album after I have sold it so well, now, I'm expecting Boz Boorer to call me at a point in time and recruit me to be on his marketing team, at which point I will probably consider his offer. We got to sit down and nail out the financials and all of that. But, if you're interested in going back and spending an hour of your life that you will never get back, then I would highly recommend that you go and you check out the new Morrissey album. The Boz Boorer album. That was sacrilegious, what I just said right there. The new Boz Boorer album. Morrissey Reimagined. And as I said before, if Boz Boorer wasn't already permanently out of the picture when it comes to Morrissey's band, I would assume that he is now after this public display. Anyway, apart from this album, let's get into some sort of positivity. There was some other big news that came out of the music world this week. On August 27th, it was announced that Oasis were ending their hiatus and coming back for a big tour of shows throughout the UK. And I think that this is genuinely big news. Now, I'm not necessarily the biggest Oasis fan in the world. I am a casual fan. And I think if you took all of Oasis's albums and you picked out all of the good songs, I think you could have one or two really great albums. They are a band that I like, don't get me wrong. But to me, they are a little bit overly hand-jobbed. They are a little bit over-celebrated, especially compared to some other bands that came out of that same sort of Britpop era. There are bands that are better than Oasis, in my opinion, but I do think it is cool to see a rock band make, the biggest news in the music world over the past couple weeks, because, rock and roll is not necessarily the music of the young people, which I can accept. I don't have a problem with that. Now, I get a little bit burnt out on the Post Malone, Billie Eilish, Taylor Swift. I realize those people probably aren't even contemporary, but what it got me thinking was, now that Oasis has officially made this announcement, what would it take? I mean, really, what would it actually take to get Morrissey and Marr to sit down and actually have this real discussion? And even before I saw this post this week, I had planned on talking about this on this channel today because of the Oasis news. But just a few days after the Oasis news, Morrissey himself released a statement via his social media platforms claiming that in June of 2024, he and Johnny Marr had both been made a huge offer to come back together and reform the Smiths, at which point Morrissey himself said that he had agreed to the terms and agreed to do this reunion, and that it was Johnny Marr who, as he said, sort of ignored the offer, leaving it, I guess, right now, at least null and void, or at least still sitting on the table. But when the Oasis news came out, that was the first thing that was the first place that my head went to as a Morrissey and Smiths fan, is what would it actually take to get Morrissey and Marr back to the negotiating table, and what would it look like at the end of the day if this was, ever to actually come to fruition? Now, we're not necessarily running out of time here, but Morrissey is now 65 years old. Marr is not that far behind him, so time is becoming a factor when it comes to this possible idea. Now, I'm one of those Smiths fans. I've said this in the past. I'll say it again. I'm one of those Smiths fans who doesn't necessarily sit around and pine over the reunion of Morrissey and Marr, because I'm a huge fan of Morrissey's solo catalog, and I'm somebody, sadly, who never got a chance to see the Smiths because I was only 12 years old when the band broke up. But if it did happen, I mean, there's my money. Take all of it. I would sell my face for a ticket to go see Morrissey and Marr. Now, I understand that this face isn't really a hot commodity, and it probably isn't going to bring in much on the black market, but it's the only one I was given, okay? But what does it actually look like if Morrissey and Marr reform at some point in time? Because to me, And this is sort of my one, requirement, I guess, or caveat, is now that Andy Rourke has sadly passed away, you can't have all 4 of the original members. So for me, let's say that Morrissey and Marr at some point in time agree to reunite and do a tour. Whether it's a world tour, whether it's a European tour, whether it's a US tour, it doesn't matter. In my opinion, based on the fact that Andy Rourke is gone, and to me, the Smiths were only 4 men. The 4 original members are the only members of the Smiths. Without Andy Rourke, you can't call it the Smiths. So call it Morrissey Marr. And if you get Mike Joyce in the fold, which I doubt, honestly. I mean, as much as I love Mike Joyce, he's my favorite drummer of all time. To me, if you do Morrissey and Marr, I mean, I'm just hoping and praying that Mike Joyce is part of it. But if he's not, then you really can't use the name the Smiths. I mean, even without Andy Rourke, to me, there's no Andy Rourke, there's no Smiths. There's no Mike Joyce, there's no Smiths. So for me, call it Morrissey Marr, and then who do you recruit to fill out the lineup if you can't get Mike Joyce? Now, to me, of course, Mike Joyce would be my top choice. Now, I was just talking about Boz Boorer and how my second favorite band of all time is the Morrissey, original classic lineup solo band, which would include Boz Boorer, Alan White, Gary Day, and Spencer Coburn. So for me, best case scenario, if you can't get Mike Joyce, then it only makes sense to recruit Spencer Coburn because he is probably my second favorite drummer of all time. He has a connection to Morrissey. I'm sure he knows the songs. He is probably technically a better drummer than Mike Joyce, although Mike Joyce is still my favorite drummer of all time. I always say this. I get burnt out when people sort of underestimate the impact that Mike Joyce had on the Smiths. I always get a little irritated when people say, anybody could do what Mike Joyce did. He didn't do anything special back there. Mike Joyce was the perfect drummer for that band, the greatest band of all time. What he did fit them perfectly, and without him or Andy Rourke, they just aren't the same band. So for me, if you can't get Mike Joyce, then I think you have to go with Spencer Coburn. And now that we can't get Andy Rourke, I think that based on this, in the spirit of the same idea, I think you go and try and find Gary Day, if he'll do it. Now, Gary Day probably knows the songs. I'm sure he could do it now, whereas I think that Spencer Coburn is technically a better drummer than Mike Joyce is. I don't think that Gary Day is technically as good a bassist as Andy Rourke was. I definitely think that Andy Rourke was a superior bassist to Gary Day, just musically. And I think that what he did in the Smiths was much more complicated than what Gary Day had to do in the Morrissey solo band, which is not a dig. I love Gary Day. I love all these guys. I love Boz Boorer. I know you probably think that I just spent a half hour taking a dump on him, but I didn't mean to. It's not personal. I love the guy. I love you, Boz. I do. But this album, man, you got to reimagine this album. But anyway, with the big news coming out of Oasis this past week, that's what it got me thinking of, is if Morrissey Marr actually made this happen, what would it look like? Where would they go? Would they do a world tour? And can you imagine? I mean, Oasis are going to be doing some big business on this tour, but can you imagine the business that Morrissey and Marr could do? Now, I have this feeling, this is my opinion, that it doesn't come down to money between Morrissey and Marr, because I guarantee that they have had money on the table for years to consider doing something like this. I don't think it has anything to do with money. I think it just has to do with the two of them and their egos and the fact that they don't particularly like each other, and the fact that probably Morrissey, more than Marr, is to blame for always, bumping his gums when it comes to his relationship with Johnny Marr and his, feelings about the Smiths. But even before this announcement came out officially by Morrissey just about a week ago on his social media platforms, I was beginning to wonder if something had changed in the big guy, because he was suddenly starting to make a lot of posts and make comments that were very complimentary to the Smiths and their legacy. And I remember thinking to myself, either Morrissey is softening in his old age, which is possible, or he's finally learned to embrace the band's legacy, which is something that I've always preached. I've always thought that, hey, look, even if you hate these guys, you guys were the greatest band in the history of the world. At least enjoy it. That was the thing about Andy Rourke that I loved the most, was Andy Rourke, when it came to the Smiths post-mortem, he was always the greatest ambassador for the band because he never said a bad word about anybody. You never heard him say a bad word about any of his former bandmates or the band themselves, and he was always very celebratory of the band's legacy. So it just got me thinking this past week with all of the Oasis news. What would it actually take? And are we getting to a point to where it could happen? Again, let's not use the name. Let's go with Morrissey Marr. Let's do something else. Let's please, if this ever happens, I'm asking as a fan, just don't use the name The Smiths. Without Andy Rourke, it just isn't the same. And if Mike Joyce is not on board, then you really, in my opinion, you just can't do it. Just go by Morrissey Marr, do something else. Find some other name. The Queen is Dead. Something. Doesn't matter. I'm not a band naming machine, but you get my point. Anyway, thank you so much for checking out this video. This is Archaic Records. My name is Jamie, coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee. Be sure to go out and support your local record store. My wife and I last week were out in Memphis for the Big Sierra Trail show. We talked about it on this channel last week. And I made a stop at River City Records in Memphis, Tennessee, a place that I had not been to as of yet. That place is right downtown, and it is pretty snug. We also checked out Shangri-La Records in Memphis, which is another one of my favorite records of all time. Actually, the owner of Shangri-La Records in Memphis passed away not too long ago, and I was sort of curious as to what the future of that record store is going to look like, but it is still there, and it is thriving, and it's one of my favorite places to go whenever I'm in Memphis, which is probably my favorite city. Anyway, check back most weeks for Morrissey Monday, a celebration of all things Morrissey and the Smiths. If you are interested, after all of my commentary, be sure to go check out the new Boz Boorer album, Morrissey Reimagined. If you like it, I'm sure there are places in your town where you can get your ears checked at a reasonable price. As for me, I think I'm going to put this record away for a little while. Now, it's interesting. I am a collector of physical media. I think that is pretty obvious if you pay attention to this channel. I like to get my hands on whatever I can. And I don't know that this record, Morrissey Reimagined, is going to be released on any sort of physical format, whether it be CD or vinyl. Now, normally my instinct would be to purchase it just to at least have it in the archive, in the library, if you will. But this one, I don't know, man. I got to think about it. I probably will, honestly. I mean, I already bought it off Bandcamp, so the damage is done, I guess. Anyway, apart from that, I think that we are just about done here. So, until next time, my friends, talk to you then.